I learned the hard way that the world doesn't care if you have nowhere left to go. It just keeps moving until it runs you over. The rain hit the roof of my van like gravel, loud enough to drown out everything except Ethan's breathing as he slept curled against my side, his small fingers clutching my jacket like it was the only thing holding his world together. And maybe it was, because this rusted van parked behind a closed grocery store off Route 9 was all I had left to give him. 32 years old, and this was what survival looked like. Counting gas money in quarters, choosing between heat and food, pretending this was temporary when deep down I knew it wasn't. I brushed damp hair from his forehead and forced myself to stay awake, because nights were when things felt wrong, when shadows stretched too long and every passing car slowed just a second too much. I told myself it was paranoia, that no one cared enough about a woman like me to notice. But then I heard it, a soft scrape against metal, too deliberate to be the wind. My body went still. Breath caught somewhere between panic and instinct. I listened. Harder. And there it was again, closer this time. Like someone testing the edges of our world. My hand moved slowly to the small pocket knife I kept under the blanket. The one I'd bought at a gas station in Pennsylvania, thinking it would make me feel safer. It didn't. Not really. Because I knew if someone truly wanted in, this thin blade wouldn't stop them. Another sound. This time a low murmur. Voices. More than one. My heart started pounding, so hard I was sure they could hear it through the metal walls. Ethan shifted in his sleep, and I froze. Terrified he'd wake up and make a sound. Terrified they'd realize we were inside. I leaned forward just enough to peek through the cracked window, rain blurring everything into shadows and movement. But I could see them now, figures standing too close, too still, like they had all the time in the world, like they were waiting. One of them stepped closer and ran a hand along the side of the van, slow, almost curious, and something inside me snapped into clarity. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. They had chosen us. My grip tightened around the knife as another hand touched the door handle, testing it. And I swallowed the fear rising in my throat because I couldn't let Ethan feel it. I couldn't let him wake up to this. I leaned down and whispered against his hair. "It's okay, baby." Even though nothing about this was okay, the handle rattled again, harder this time. Metal shaking under the pressure, my pulse roared in my ears. Every instinct screaming to run, even though there was nowhere to go. And then, suddenly, without warning, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness, bright and blinding, washing everything in sharp white light. The figures outside froze, just for a second, just long enough for something to shift in the air. I turned toward the light, heart still racing, as a black SUV rolled to a slow, controlled stop just a few yards away, engine humming like it didn't belong to this broken parking lot, like it belonged to a different world entirely. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving with a kind of certainty that made the rain feel quieter, like even the storm was paying attention. He didn't look at them first, he looked at the van, at me, through the glass, like he already knew exactly what he was seeing. And in that moment, something changed, something I couldn't explain, because for the first time in a long time, the fear didn't feel like the only thing in the air anymore. The man did not raise his voice, and somehow that made everything feel more controlled, more final, like the air itself had decided to listen to him. The figures outside the van stepped back without argument, without hesitation, as if they had been waiting for a reason to leave, and he gave them one without saying much at all. I could not hear every word through the rain and glass, but I saw enough. The way they avoided his eyes, the way their posture changed, smaller, careful, like they understood something I did not. Within seconds they were gone, disappearing into the darkness like they had never been there. And just like that, the pressure around my chest loosened, but only slightly, because now there was only him, standing under the rain like he belonged to it, like none of this surprised him. His gaze returned to me, steady, unreadable, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. I tightened my hold around Ethan, instinct pulling him closer even though the danger outside had shifted into something quieter, something I could not define. The man took a few steps closer to the van, slow enough not to startle, but deliberate enough that I knew it was not a suggestion. Every movement measured, controlled, like he had done this before. Many times, he stopped just a few feet from the door, close enough that I could see the details now. The clean lines of his coat, the rain sliding off dark fabric, the calm in his expression that did not match the situation at all. People like me did not meet people like him. Not in parking lots. Not in the middle of the night. Not like this. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to work. "We are fine," I said, even though my hands were still shaking, even though nothing about this felt fine. His eyes flicked briefly to Ethan, taking in the way my son clung to me even in his sleep, and something shifted, not softer, but sharper, more focused, like he had just decided something important. "You are not fine," he said quietly, his voice low but certain, the kind of certainty that did not invite disagreement. I shook my head immediately, fear and pride mixing into something stubborn. "We do not need help," I added, because that was the rule I had learned. Do not depend on strangers. Do not trust men who arrive out of nowhere. Do not accept anything that comes too easily. His gaze returned to mine, steady, patient, like he had all the time in the world, like my resistance was expected, almost irrelevant. The rain softened for a moment, just enough that I could hear the faint hum of his car engine behind him, smooth, expensive, out of place in this broken lot. "They will come back," he said, not as a threat, not even as a warning, just a fact. And that hit harder than anything else, because deep down I knew he was right. People like that did not give up easily, not when they had already chosen their target. My grip on the knife tightened again, though it felt smaller now, almost useless compared to the reality he was describing. I forced myself to hold his gaze, refusing to let him see how much his words unsettled me. "Then we will leave," I said, even though the van barely had enough gas to get us to the next town. Even though leaving had never solved anything before. He studied me for a long second, eyes moving from my face to the worn interior behind me, the thin blankets, the small bag of clothes, the life I had tried to make work in a space not meant for living, and something in his expression shifted again. Not pity, never pity, something closer to recognition. "You have been leaving for a long time," he said, and I felt that land somewhere deeper than I expected, because he was not wrong. I had been running for months, from bills, from memories, from a life that had slowly fallen apart. And yet here I was, still not safe, still not far enough. The silence stretched between us, heavy but not empty. And then he took one final step closer, close enough that I could see the reflection of the van in his eyes. "Come with me," he said, simple, direct, like it was the most logical solution in the world. And everything inside me resisted, every instinct screaming that nothing in life came without a cost, especially not from someone like him. I shook my head again, firmer this time. "No," I said, because saying yes felt like stepping into something I would not be able to walk away from. His expression did not change, not anger, not frustration, just acceptance, like he had expected that answer all along. He turned slightly, as if to leave, and for a brief second I thought that was it. That he would disappear the same way he arrived, like a moment that did not belong to my life. But then he paused, just enough to look back over his shoulder, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but somehow even more certain. "You kept him safe this long," he said, eyes flicking once more to Ethan. "But you cannot do it alone forever." And something in the way he said it made my chest tighten, not fear this time, something more dangerous, something that felt like the edge of a choice I was not ready to make. I did not realize I was holding my breath until he turned away and the air rushed back into my lungs like I had been underwater, my grip on Ethan tightening, as if letting go for even a second would change something permanent. He moved toward the black SUV without looking back again, every step calm, unhurried, like the outcome had already been decided somewhere I could not see. The driver's side door opened before he even reached it. Someone inside I had not noticed, someone who had been there the whole time, watching, waiting, reinforcing the quiet truth that men like him were never alone. I told myself this was my chance, that I should start the engine, drive away, disappear before whatever pull he had could settle any deeper into my bones. I reached for the keys hanging from a thin piece of string near the steering wheel, my fingers brushing against cold metal, but I did not turn it. I just sat there, listening to the rain soften into a steady rhythm, listening to Ethan's breathing as he stirred slightly against me, his small voice barely more than a whisper. "Mom?" My heart twisted instantly, and I lowered my head to press my lips gently against his hair. "I am right here," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. forcing safety into words I was not entirely sure I could promise anymore. His eyes blinked open slowly, confused, still caught between sleep and whatever he had sensed without fully waking. "Are we okay?" he asked, and that question, so simple, so trusting, felt heavier than anything else that had happened tonight. I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long before answering, and I knew he noticed. Children always did. "Yes," I said finally, softer now. "We are okay." But even as I said it, my eyes drifted back to the SUV, to the man who had stepped into our lives without warning and shifted something I could not undo. The engine of his vehicle hummed again, low and smooth. And for a second I thought he would leave, that this moment would dissolve into something I would later question if it had even been real. But then the door remained open, as if waiting, not for permission, not for agreement, just waiting. And I felt it then, not pressure, not force, something quieter and more unsettling, an expectation, like he already understood the direction this night would take. I swallowed hard and looked down at Ethan, his small hand gripping my sleeve, his eyes still searching my face for answers I did not have. I thought about the last few months, about sleeping in different parking lots, about leaving before sunrise, about counting every dollar, about pretending I had control when in reality I had just been delaying something inevitable. The truth settled in slowly but firmly. I could leave tonight, I could drive until the gas ran out and find another place to hide. But nothing would actually change. The same fear would follow, the same risks, the same fragile safety that depended on luck more than anything else. And luck had never stayed with me for long. I closed my eyes briefly, just long enough to feel the weight of that realization. Then I opened them again and looked toward the SUV, the door still open, the man now standing beside it, watching, not impatient, not demanding, just certain, as if he had already seen this moment play out before. My hand tightened around the keys again, but this time it felt different, less like escape and more like a decision. I shifted slightly, easing Ethan upright so he could sit beside me, his small fingers still wrapped around mine. "Stay close to me," I whispered, and he nodded without question, trusting me the way only a child could. And that trust was the only thing that made this next step possible. I reached for the van door handle, my pulse steady but heavy, aware that once I opened it, something in my life would change in a way I could not reverse. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving behind a quiet that felt too still, too watchful. I pushed the door open slowly, stepping out into the damp night air with Ethan at my side. And for the first time since this all began, I walked toward him instead of away. I felt every step between the van and him like I was crossing a line I could never uncross. The wet pavement cold beneath my shoes, Ethan's small hand gripping mine tighter with each step, as if he understood that this was not just movement but a decision, the kind that changes everything quietly without asking permission. The man watched us approach without shifting, without filling the silence with unnecessary words, and somehow that made it worse, because it left space for my thoughts to spiral, for every warning I had ever learned to echo in my mind. Do not trust, do not follow, do not believe in easy solutions. But none of those warnings had ever come with a night like this, with a moment where staying meant risk and leaving meant the same. I stopped a few feet away from him, close enough now to see the faint lines in his expression, not age, not softness, just experience, like someone who had lived through things he did not need to explain. Ethan shifted slightly beside me, pressing closer to my leg, his eyes wide but curious, not afraid in the way I expected. And that unsettled me more than anything else, because children did not react like that unless they felt something different in the air, something steadier than fear. The man's gaze lowered briefly to Ethan again, and there it was, not warmth, not quite, but a deliberate awareness, as if Ethan mattered in a way that had already been decided. "You should not be out here," he said, his voice calm, measured, like a statement of fact rather than judgment. I lifted my chin slightly, instinctively defensive. "We are managing," I replied, even though the word felt fragile the moment it left my mouth. His eyes returned to mine, holding them without pressure, without challenge, just steady. "Managing is not the same as safe," he said, and I had no immediate answer to that because he was right. In a way I could not argue. I tightened my grip on Ethan's hand instead, grounding myself in the one thing I knew was real. "What do you want?" I asked, forcing the question out before my hesitation could stop me. Because understanding his intention felt like the only way to regain some control, he did not answer immediately, and that pause stretched just long enough to make me aware of everything around us. The quiet lot, the faint drip of water from the edge of the van, the distant hum of a highway somewhere beyond the darkness. Then he spoke. "I want you somewhere they cannot reach you." Simple, direct, and somehow more unsettling than anything else he could have said, because it did not sound like an offer. It sounded like a conclusion. I shook my head slightly, not in refusal, but in disbelief. "People do not just do that for strangers," I said, the edge in my voice sharper now, shaped by experience, by every promise that had ever come with conditions I could not afford. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like he understood exactly what I meant. "I do not do things for strangers," he said quietly, and that should have been enough to make me step back, to turn around, to return to the van and pretend none of this had happened. But I did not move, because something in the way he said it did not feel like rejection. It felt like clarification, like he had already decided I was not a stranger anymore. The realization settled uneasily in my chest, and before I could respond, he reached for the rear door of the SUV, opening it with the same controlled ease as everything else he had done. The interior lights spilled out softly, revealing clean leather seats, warmth, space, a world so different from the one behind me that it almost did not feel real. Ethan looked up at me, his voice small but steady. "Mom?" And I felt the weight of that single word press against every doubt I had. Because this was not just about me. It had never been just about me. I looked back at the van for a brief second, at the life I had been holding together piece by piece, and then I looked at him again, standing there like a fixed point in a night that had been anything but stable. And in that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding. This was not about whether I trusted him. It was about whether I could afford not to. And that was a different kind of truth entirely. I did not move right away, even with the door open and the quiet warmth of the car spilling into the cold night, because stepping forward felt like more than just getting inside. It felt like agreeing to something I did not fully understand yet. Ethan's hand tightened in mine again, smaller, warmer, grounding me in a way nothing else could, and I looked down at him, searching his face for fear, for hesitation, for anything that would tell me to stop, but all I saw was trust, simple and complete, the kind that does not question the world because it believes in you to understand it instead, and that trust pressed against my chest harder than any warning ever could. I took a slow breath, the kind you take before making a decision you know you cannot undo, and then I stepped forward, guiding Ethan gently into the back seat first, his small body climbing in without resistance, his eyes flicking around the interior with quiet curiosity, taking in the clean seats, the soft lighting, the absence of everything he had grown used to in the van. I followed after him, the door closing behind me with a muted, solid sound that felt final in a way I could not explain. The air inside was warmer, calmer, insulated from the world we had just left behind, and for a moment I just sat there, my hand still wrapped around Ethan's, listening to the quiet hum of the engine, the faint sound of rain against glass now distant instead of overwhelming. The man moved around the vehicle and slid into the front seat, his presence filling the space without effort, without noise. The driver glanced at him briefly in the rearview mirror, a silent exchange passing between them that did not need words. And then the car began to move, smooth and steady, pulling away from the parking lot like it had never belonged there in the first place. I turned my head slightly, watching through the window as the van grew smaller, the only place I had managed to call ours over. The past months fading into the dark, and I expected to feel relief, but instead there was something else, something heavier, like I had just closed a chapter one had not been ready to let go of. Ethan shifted closer to me, resting his head against my arm, his voice soft but clearer now. "Are we going somewhere safe?" And the question lingered in the space between us, simple but loaded with everything I had been trying to protect him from. I hesitated again, not because I did not want to answer, but because I did not know what the truth looked like yet. Before I could respond, the man's voice came from the front, calm, certain. "Yes," he said, not loud, not forceful, but with a kind of finality that made it feel less like a promise and more like a guarantee. Ethan seemed to accept that immediately, his body relaxing against me, the tension leaving him in a way that made me realize just how much he had been carrying without showing it. I looked up, my eyes meeting the reflection of the man in the rearview mirror, his gaze steady, unreadable, but not distant, like he was aware of everything happening in the back seat without needing to turn around. "Where are you taking us?" I asked quietly, because even now, even after stepping into this, I needed to hold on to something that felt like control. He did not answer right away, the city lights beginning to appear as we moved farther from the empty lot, casting faint reflections across the interior. Then finally he spoke. "Somewhere no one will look for you." And there it was again, that certainty, that quiet confidence that made it sound less like a possibility and more like a fact already set in motion. I leaned back, slightly, my mind trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. The shift from fear to this strange, controlled calm. The way he had stepped into our world and redirected it without effort, without asking for anything in return, at least not yet. And that was the part that unsettled me the most, because nothing in my life had ever come without a cost. I tightened my arm around Ethan as he drifted closer to sleep again, his breathing evening out against me, trusting, unguarded, and I realized that whatever this was, whatever path I had just stepped onto, it was no longer just about surviving the night. It was about understanding the man who had just changed the direction of our lives with a single decision, and whether that decision would protect us or bind us in ways I had not yet begun to see. The city did not welcome us. It absorbed us, the streets shifting from empty darkness into quiet lines of light and movement as the car glided forward without hesitation. Every turn smooth, every stop calculated, like even the road had already been decided before we arrived. I kept my eyes on the window, watching buildings rise taller, cleaner, more distant from the world we had just left behind. And the contrast made something in my chest tighten, because this was not a place I belonged, not anymore, maybe not ever. Ethan stirred beside me, his small hand still wrapped around mine, even in sleep, and I adjusted slightly, so his head rested more comfortably against my shoulder, the soft rhythm of his breathing grounding me, while everything else felt uncertain, unfamiliar. I lifted my gaze again to the reflection in the mirror, finding his eyes already there, watching without staring, aware without pressing, like he had learned how to control even the way he observed people. "You keep looking at exits," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet without raising it. And I blinked, caught off guard, realizing he was right. My eyes had been tracking every street, every corner, measuring distance, calculating options. Instinct I had built over months of not feeling safe anywhere. Habit. I answered, my voice steady but careful, because I did not know what he did with honesty, whether he valued it or used it. His expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened slightly, like he had just confirmed something he already suspected. "You will not need that anymore," he said, simple, certain, and again that tone, not reassurance, not comfort, just a quiet declaration of how things would be. I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. Habits like mine did not disappear just because someone said they would. They stayed, carved deep into you by nights like the one we had just left behind. "People always say that," I replied, softer now, less defensive, more tired. "It never really works that way." He did not argue, did not push, just let the silence settle again. And somehow that unsettled me more than if he had tried to convince me, because it meant he was not interested in changing my mind. He was interested in changing my reality. The car slowed as we turned onto a quieter street, lined with buildings that looked untouched by the kind of life I had been living. Clean sidewalks, soft lighting, doors that closed properly, windows that did not rattle in the wind. And I felt the difference immediately, not just in what I saw, but in how it felt, controlled, protected, distant from chaos. The vehicle came to a smooth stop in front of a building that looked more like a private residence than anything else, tall, understated, secure in a way that did not need to announce itself. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off completely, and the sudden quiet made everything feel sharper, more real. Ethan shifted again, blinking awake slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim light outside. "Are we there?" he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. I hesitated, because I did not know what to call this place yet. Safe felt too certain, Temporary felt too fragile, but before I could answer, the man opened his door and stepped out, moving around to our side with the same calm precision. The rear door opened, and cool air slipped in, carrying the faint scent of rain and something cleaner beneath it. Something unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. I looked at him, searching his face for something I could hold on to, an explanation, a condition, anything that would make this make sense in the way my world used to. But all I found was that same steady certainty, like he had already accounted for every question I had not yet asked. "Come inside," he said, not an order, not quite an invitation, something in between, something that assumed I would follow. And I realized then that this was the moment that mattered more than stepping into the car, because this was not just leaving one place behind. This was entering something I did not understand yet, something that had rules I had not learned. I helped Ethan out first, his small hand slipping into mine again as he looked up at the building with quiet curiosity. And then I stepped out after him, the door closing behind us with a soft final click. And as I stood there, looking up at a place that felt too still, too controlled to be accidental, I understood something I had been trying not to see. This was not just about keeping us safe for one night. This was about stepping into a world where safety came with a price I had not yet been told. The building did not look intimidating, and that was what made it unsettling. There were no flashing lights, no visible guards, no signs warning people to stay away. Just quiet structure and clean lines that suggested control without needing to announce it. The kind of place where everything was already handled before it became a problem. I hesitated at the base of the entrance steps, Ethan's hand still in mine, his small fingers squeezing once as if to ask a question he did not put into words. I glanced down at him and forced a small, reassuring smile, the kind I had learned to give even when I was not sure myself. "Stay close," I whispered again, and he nodded, trusting, always trusting. The man moved ahead of us, opening the door without effort, as if it recognized him, as if everything here did, and warm light spilled out across the threshold, soft and steady, not harsh like the streetlights we had grown used to. I stepped inside slowly, aware of the shift immediately. The air felt different, cleaner, quieter, like the outside world had been sealed away the moment the door closed behind us. My shoulders tensed automatically, waiting for something to happen, for someone to question us, to stop us. But no one did. The space was still, controlled, intentional, the kind of silence that comes from design, not emptiness. Ethan's eyes moved around the room with quiet curiosity, taking in details I barely registered, and I realized how long it had been since he had been somewhere like this, somewhere that felt stable. The man did not look back to check if we were following. He did not need to, his pace steady, assured, like this path had already been decided. I followed anyway, because stopping now would not return me to what I had left behind. It would only leave me standing in between two worlds that no longer fit together. We moved down a hallway that felt too polished, too untouched by the kind of life I understood. Doors closed, lights dim but purposeful. Everything placed exactly where it should be. No chaos, no improvisation. And that contrast made something in me feel out of place, like I had stepped into a story that was not written for people like me. He stopped at a door near the end of the hall and opened it, stepping aside just enough for us to enter first, and that small gesture caught me off guard, not because it was kind, but because it was deliberate, like everything else he did. I guided Ethan inside, my eyes scanning the room automatically, measuring exits, counting distances, the habit still there despite his earlier words. It was a bedroom, simple but far from basic, clean sheets, soft lighting, space that felt untouched and ready, like it had been waiting. And that thought unsettled me more than it should have. "You can rest here," he said from the doorway, his voice as calm as before, but now there was something else beneath it, not urgency, not impatience, something quieter, like expectation. I turned toward him, my instincts pulling in two directions at once. One telling me to accept the safety, the other warning me that safety like this always came with rules. "Why?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it, because I needed to understand what this was, what he was, what we had just stepped into. He held my gaze for a moment, not avoiding, not deflecting, just steady. "Because you needed somewhere no one could find you," he answered. The same certainty, the same control, but this time it felt closer, more personal, like it was not just about the situation anymore. I tightened my hold on Ethan slightly, grounding myself again. That is not a reason, I said quietly, because it was not enough, not for someone like me. His expression did not change, but his next words came slower, more deliberate. It is for me. And that shifted something. Not clarity, not comfort, just a deeper awareness that this was not random, that whatever had started in that parking lot had meaning I had not uncovered yet. Ethan tugged gently at my hand, drawing my attention back to him, his eyes softer now, less guarded. "Can we stay here tonight?" he asked. And there it was, the question that mattered more than anything else. Simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. I looked at him, then back at the man standing in the doorway, and for the first time since all of this began, I realized that whatever decision I made next would not just be about surviving anymore. It would be about choosing what kind of world my son would grow up in, and whether the man in front of me was part of that world or something I should still be running from. I did not answer him right away because the weight of that question settled deeper than anything else that had been said tonight. Ethan's fingers still wrapped around mine, his eyes waiting, trusting, and I realized that whatever fear I still held, it could not be louder than that trust. I exhaled slowly and nodded once, small but certain. "Just tonight," I said, more to myself than anyone else, like placing a boundary I hoped I could still control. Ethan's shoulders relaxed immediately, the tension leaving him in a way that made my chest ache, because I had not seen him look this at ease in months. He moved toward the bed without hesitation, running his hand across the clean blanket like it was something unfamiliar, something he had only seen from a distance. I watched him for a moment, memorizing that look, the quiet relief, the simple comfort, and it hit me how little it had taken to give him something I had struggled to provide. The man remained by the doorway, not stepping further in, not interrupting, just observing with that same calm awareness, like he understood the importance of the moment without needing to be part of it. "There are clothes in the dresser," he said after a moment, his voice low, even, clean. "Your sizes are inside." I turned toward him immediately at that, a flicker of suspicion rising again, sharp and instinctive. "How would you know our sizes?" I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice this time, because that detail crossed into something more personal, something that suggested he had been paying attention before tonight. His gaze did not shift, did not avoid. "I noticed details," he said simply, and that answer did not calm me. It deepened the unease, because noticing meant watching, and watching meant this might not have been as random as I had thought. I held his gaze for a second longer, searching for something that would explain it, but there was nothing obvious, nothing I could point to and understand. Just that same controlled presence, like he had already accounted for my reaction. "You should rest," he added, not pushing, not insisting, just stating it like it was the next logical step. I hesitated again, my instincts still pulling at me. But then Ethan climbed onto the bed, pulling the blanket up around himself with a small, content sigh, and that sound alone shifted everything. I turned back toward the man, my voice quieter now, less guarded but still careful. "What happens tomorrow?" The question felt heavier than I expected, because tomorrow meant decisions, meant consequences, meant whatever this situation really was. He was silent for a moment, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something change, not uncertainty, but consideration, like he was choosing his words more carefully than before. "Tomorrow," he said slowly. "You decide if you stay." And that answer caught me off guard, because it gave me something I had not expected, a choice. Even if I did not fully believe how free that choice actually was, I studied him again, trying to understand if this was real, if I could actually walk away after stepping this far into his world. But there was no clear answer in his expression, just that steady calm that made everything feel already set in motion. He stepped back slightly, creating more space between us and the doorway, as if signaling the end of the conversation without saying it. "No one will come here," he added, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. "You can sleep without listening for footsteps." And that sentence landed in a way nothing else had, because it named something I had not realized I was carrying every second: the constant listening, the constant waiting, the tension that never fully left. I swallowed, my throat tight with something I could not quite define, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to let that go, even just for one night. He gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, then turned and stepped out into the hallway, the door remaining open just a few inches behind him, not closed, not sealed, just enough space to remind me that I was not locked in, but also not entirely separate. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that narrow gap, understanding more clearly now that this was not just about safety. It was about trust, about stepping into something unknown and deciding whether to believe it could be different. And as I finally moved to sit beside Ethan, pulling the blanket gently around him while his breathing evened out into sleep, I realized that the most dangerous part of this night was not the men outside the van. It was the quiet certainty of a man who had just given me a place to rest and expected me to choose whether to leave. I did not sleep right away, even after Ethan's breathing settled into that soft, steady rhythm I had not heard in what felt like forever, because my body did not know how to accept stillness without questioning it. Every quiet moment felt temporary, like something was waiting just outside the edges of it. I sat there on the edge of the bed, my hand resting lightly against Ethan's back, feeling the rise and fall of each breath as if it could anchor me to something real, something certain. The room remained quiet, untouched by the outside world. No passing cars, no distant voices, no sudden noises that made my heart jump. Just silence, controlled and complete. And that silence should have been comforting, but instead it felt unfamiliar, like a language I had forgotten how to understand. My eyes drifted to the door, still slightly open, that narrow space unchanged, a reminder that I could leave if I wanted to, that nothing here was physically holding me in place. And yet I had not moved, not even a step toward it. I stood slowly, careful not to wake Ethan, and crossed the room, each step quiet against the floor, my fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the door before I pushed it open just enough to see into the hallway. It was empty, still, the same controlled calm as before, and for a moment I just stood there, listening, waiting for something to break the silence, something to remind me that this was not as simple as it seemed. But nothing came. No movement, no voices, just that same steady quiet. I stepped out into the hallway, leaving the door open behind me, not closing the space between me and Ethan completely, never that, and followed the soft light down the corridor, not because I had a destination, but because standing still felt harder than moving forward. I found him exactly where I expected, though I had not known where that would be until I saw it. Sitting in a dimly lit room at the end of the hall, one hand resting lightly against the arm of a chair, his posture relaxed but not careless. Like even in stillness he was aware of everything around him. He did not look surprised when I appeared in the doorway, as if he had already known I would not stay in that room all night. "You should be resting," he said, his voice low, steady, but not dismissive. I leaned slightly against the frame, my arms crossing loosely, not defensive, just grounding. I am not used to places that stay quiet, I admitted, the truth coming out easier than I expected. Maybe because pretending felt pointless in a place like this. His gaze held mine for a moment, and something shifted again, subtle but real, like he understood that more than he let on. "You will get used to it," he replied, and there it was again, that certainty, not forcing, not persuading, just stating what he believed would happen. I studied him more carefully now, not just the presence he carried, but the details, the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way everything around him seemed to align without effort. "You talk like everything is already decided," I said quietly, and this time, something close to a faint expression crossed his face, not quite a smile, but not entirely neutral either. "Most things are," he answered, and I felt that settle somewhere deep, not comforting, not alarming, just true in a way I could not argue. I took a small breath, my next question forming before I could stop it. "And us?" The word felt heavier than I intended, more personal, more dangerous. His gaze did not shift, did not avoid. "You were already in motion before I met you," he said, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. I just changed the direction, and that answer stayed with me, lingering in the space between us, because it did not take anything away from me. It did not claim ownership, but it did not release me either. It placed me somewhere in between, and I realized then that this was what made him different. Not the power, not the control, but the way he saw things as inevitable rather than optional. I looked back down the hallway, toward the room where Ethan was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, and then back at him. And for the first time since this all began, the fear inside me shifted into something else, something quieter, more uncertain, but not entirely unwelcome. Because maybe for once, I was not just running anymore. Maybe I had stepped into something that would not let me disappear, and as I turned to go back to that room, to that quiet, to that fragile sense of safety I had not trusted yet, I realized that tomorrow was not just about deciding whether to stay. It was about understanding what it meant to be seen by someone who had already decided I was not meant to be lost.